Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, August 13th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news, read between the lines so you don't have to. And sometimes we stay up until 12 a.m. Eastern Time for major headlines, Jill.
And in case you are not familiar with what Moshe is referring to, Taylor Swift announced her 12th studio album. It is called The Life of a Showgirl at 12 a.m. on August 12th. And in a bit of a throwback, it's available for pre-order in vinyl, CD, and cassette formats. What do we make of that, Moshe?
Like, I know that vinyl is like still around. People can get record players, CD, okay, but like cassette? Like, who's buying cassette tapes? The last time I bought a cassette tape, Jill, the year was 1993, and I think I bought Ace of Base: The Sign. I think that was the last cassette tape I bought. So was that 32 years ago? Can't believe still the 90s or 30 years ago. But I do have like a Magnavox or a Sanyo boombox, I think, in my parents' garage. If somebody accidentally buys the cassette tape on TaylorSwift.com, I can lend you my boombox.
Right. The question is, if they buy a cassette, do they have something to play the cassette? Or is it just sort of a nostalgia purchase and they're going to stream the whole thing anyway?
She's going to make hundreds of millions of dollars off of cassette tape, CDs, and records that no one's ever going to play because they're going to stream it on Spotify. So here are the details. By the way, apologies. We didn't stay up till like 1 a.m. 2 nights ago to deliver this news to you fresh yesterday morning. So you probably learned it somewhere else yesterday. If not, you're learning it here a day late. Nonetheless, we know the name. We know it's the 12th album. Orange is the theme, but beyond the fact that you can get a cassette tape, vinyl, or a CD, we don't know the set list. We do know that Sabrina Carpenter, I guess there might be a duet there, and they say on the website to expect shipping before October 13th, but they're not saying that October 13th is the sort of release date. But it sounds like sometime in the next 2 months here, we will be seeing the latest and greatest Taylor Swift. If you're looking for more details, you can check out the Kelsey Brothers podcast. She did like a whole thing with her boyfriend, Travis, and his brother, Jason. And so she will be on their podcast. I believe that should be out by the time you finish this podcast today. And that is the New Heights podcast, where she does some reveal.
And another thing that you might have missed, or maybe not, the Perseid meteor shower. So the Perseid's cosmic spectacle has actually been active since July 17th, and it runs through next week. But apparently they hit their peak last night. If you missed it, though, you might have another chance in the early morning on Friday or Saturday, because the moon will be a bit less bright, so you'll have a better chance of seeing it.
Typically, the shower gives you almost 100 shooting stars an hour. This year, expect a little less. Again, the moon is super bright right now, so in a couple of days, it'll be slightly dimmer, and you can catch that late at night or early morning hours. So a lot, Jill, happening this week just after midnight. You got meteor showers, you got Taylor Swift announcements. It pays to stay up late. Or maybe it doesn't. You can wake up in the morning.
Or get up early.
Or get up super, super early to see the meteor shower and check TaylorSwift.com to see if your cassette tape is in the mail. Do the kids these days understand what that entails? Like rewinding to play the song again? Like, at least with the record, you move the needle. The CD, you just have to press a button. Like, cassette tape, that was like I don't like look back fondly and like, oh man,
no.
I miss cassette tapes.
And they have no idea about how the tape could get tangled. And then you'd have to try to like roll it back in.
With a pencil? Yeah.
With anything. And it would still not be great. Or a CD that could potentially scratch. There were a lot of things that could potentially go wrong with that technology, as we'll call it.
Yeah, at least, it's it was our generation's version of like the ice box arriving, like the big piece of ice for your ice box, or the milkman arriving. We like grew up in an era where you could buy that stuff in the grocery store and there was a freezer, but we still had to rewind the cassette tape with a pencil. But I digress, Joe. We have a lot of news to get to today.
All right, now to the headlines. We are learning more about the CDC shooting last week, a possible motive, and why some CDC employees say they are scared to go to work and not too happy with HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. To the economy, what new inflation numbers tell us about the impact of President Trump's tariffs on prices.
Plus, what his pick, who he is planning to have lead the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the chief statistician, is saying about those monthly jobs reports.
Yesterday, we told you about how President Trump is ordering National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. How did things go on the first day? And an update on those Texas state lawmakers who fled the state last week. Where are they headed next?
I'm coming home, coming home.
To the Middle East, Israel says that a review of the situation in Gaza shows that Hamas is inflating hunger data in what they're calling an orchestrated campaign. We'll explain.
And what the UN has to say about that.
Another mass shooting, this time in Austin, Texas, at a Target store. What we're learning about the suspect and his criminal history. To tech, OpenAI's Sam Altman is challenging Elon Musk with plans for a rival to Neuralink, what we know about it.
Yeah, basically both billionaires now have plans to figure out ways to put computer chips in our brains, Jill. You'll have options in the market coming up.
They have to go first. And in sports and tourism, will wave pools turn surfing into the next golf? A really interesting story about the future, potentially, of surfing. And Moshe is on this day in history.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog. You might think that was an Elvis song, but we'll give you the origins of hound dog on this day in history.
Because I was going to say, I think you're giving it away here. But no.
No.
Okay, now to that shooting at the CDC last Friday. It took the life of a police officer, David Rose. We're learning a bit more about what happened that day and the gunman's possible motive, and the overall frustration and genuine fear amongst workers at the CDC, some of whose offices now have bullet holes in the windows. Officials say the gunman had previously written about his discontent with the COVID-19 vaccine. We're also learning that he died after shooting himself. 30-year-old Patrick Joseph White sprayed nearly 200 rounds into 6 CDC buildings. Investigators recovered more than 500 shell casings and 5 firearms from the scene. Authorities say that White took the guns from his father's safe. He blamed the COVID-19 vaccine for making him depressed and suicidal. President Trump, meanwhile, has been pretty quiet about the attack. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. condemned it. He traveled to Atlanta earlier this week. He wrote on X that the entire administration is deeply saddened by the tragic loss of the police officer and that they stand with Officer Rose's wife, his 2 young children, and their baby on the way. He also did an interview with Scripps News where he called HHS workers shining stars, quote, working in silence, saving us all and protecting our health. And he says that they should not be the targets of this type of violence. But then the anchor asked him what is to be done to prevent misinformation and disinformation so this type of thing doesn't happen again. RFK Jr. saying that we still don't know enough about the motive of the shooter, despite all the things that we're learning about the shooter's views of the COVID vaccine. And RFK Jr. also saying that one of the things we saw during COVID was what he called an overreach by health officials in persuading the public to get vaccinated. And he says they said things that weren't true. Take a listen.
The Americans have lost faith in the federal government. We have to ask, why are people not believing the public health agencies? And the answer, I think, is pretty elementary. The public health agencies have not been honest. And no matter how well-intentioned it is to tell a noble lie, to get an outcome that you want, it never works over the long time.
Needless to say, that is not sitting well with everyone, particularly people who work at the CDC and with the health department. Some say not only is his response to the shooting not enough, but that his rhetoric in the past may have actually fueled some of the distrust and the current environment.
So, Jill, there's a lot of frustration here with RFK Jr. I mean, already going into these past 6 months, when we were at the White House in March interviewing him, that was the day he announced the major cutbacks at a number of the agencies. On top of that, there's all his anti-vaccine rhetoric. On top of that, decision last week to cut funding to mRNA vaccines. So there is this feeling internally that he is fueling part of the distrust in the CDC, both with his rhetoric and his actions prior to becoming HHS secretary and the actions he has taken since then. I should also mention that he eliminated the board, the vaccine board. He's eliminated a lot of longtime folks there due to his views about the agency. And of course, all of this has played out in public. A recent poll by the health policy group KFF, the Kaiser Family Foundation, found that less than half of the U.S. public says they now have confidence in the FDA and the CDC to carry out their core responsibilities. Obviously, a lot of that against the backdrop here of COVID, the vaccines, the varying messages they got from public health professionals, or the varying interpretations they had of what health professionals were saying about the vaccine and COVID, the idea of mandates, a lot of that. But health officials internally blaming Kennedy himself. So they feel like he isn't doing enough here. And the fact that in the same breath, he condemns the shooting, but then also reinforces some of the arguments here about the COVID vaccine and distrust has them feeling like he doesn't have their back. Notably, Trump's first-term Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, was doing interviews over the weekend, including one with CBS, where he called out Kennedy, calling the response tepid, saying that his inflammatory rhetoric, these are his words, in the past have actually contributed to a lot of what's going on here. And so you have people at the CDC who are like, this guy pumped 200 bullets into the building. Thankfully, the security had stopped him at the front door. So what did he end up doing was going across the street on top of a CVS pharmacy, and that's where he started opening fire into the windows there. And I think there's some contributing factors here, Jill. People, they're frustrated that they don't feel this has gotten sufficient attention. Trump has not spoken out about it as of this recording. The White House has put out kind of a general statement from a spokesperson. This is a government agency. The president oversees the government. There are some people down there who expect the president would have traveled down there to reassure folks that RFK would have traveled down there immediately and not waited the entire weekend to go there. And so they do feel like they're being hung out to dry here and that they're concerned for their own security.
And Moshe, we also heard from some people who work for the CDC who say they're extremely frustrated and, as you just said, even scared after Friday's shooting.
Yeah, we have a number of listeners of this podcast, followers on Instagram who work at the CDC, someone messaging us, a CDC employee here, Moshe. We had an all-agency meeting with our new director, and to say it was disastrous is an understatement. She read badly off a teleprompter, spoke for 5 minutes, didn't give more information. The call was plagued with technical difficulties. We're all dismayed. CDC employees are traumatized. People's office windows have bullet holes in them. The guard station was shot up. The media doesn't seem to care. That's their impression as well. Now, we should note this happened on a Friday afternoon. And so typically stories like that sometimes get buried, but also if the president was making a bigger deal out of it, it would be getting more attention. And then Jill, of course, on Monday was the huge announcement regarding DC. So shifting priorities there, the media sort of moves on. But certainly, given some of the rhetoric you're seeing online, various conspiracy theories, and now somebody with clear mental health issues taking things into his own hands with several firearms there, leading some folks at CDC headquarters to hope that they're going to be getting some more support here from the powers that be in the coming days.
Now to some news when it comes to the economy. We're learning more about inflation in the wake of President Trump's tariffs. Some new numbers out Tuesday show that consumer prices held steady, meaning that prices haven't jumped all that much, at least not yet. The Consumer Price Index, which is a key measure of inflation, stayed put at 2.7% compared to last July. The price of rent and homes rose slightly in July. Food was unchanged and energy prices dropped about 1%. Gas prices dropped by about 2%. However, the new data shows that tariffs are driving some prices up. The report shows so-called core inflation. So that's the rate that takes out food and energy costs. That rose by more than 3% over the past year. And even though that doesn't sound like a lot, it represents one of the largest monthly increases so far this year, and also the fastest yearly pace in about 5 months. And we did see price increases for things like toys, furniture, and apparel. Beef prices also are up, but that is for reasons unrelated to the tariffs, things like herd size and drought. As for what is next, experts still expect that rising prices could be around the corner. Some analysts have said it could take about 8 months or so from when the tariffs took effect until we see prices really impacted. As for the Federal Reserve, the Fed has sent a 2% target rate for inflation. And even though these numbers are higher than that, most economists are expecting that the Fed will cut interest rates in September. And interestingly, Moshe, these numbers are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is that same group that releases the jobs numbers, which the president has criticized. At Tuesday's press briefing, a reporter asked White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt why Americans should trust the inflation numbers and not the job numbers. And she said the jobs numbers keep getting revised, which is something we don't tend to see, at least not in such an extreme as the inflation numbers.
Yeah, there's been some more reliability there from the inflation numbers than the jobs numbers. You've had those major downward revisions going back a couple of years now. And that's the reason we're seeing this changeover at BLS, though Trump has said that the last person who was cooking the books was a Democrat and making him look bad, even though many of the downward revisions last year made Biden look bad. And ultimately, the issue at BLS is just the lack of companies out there filling out their surveys. So they have seen fewer responses, and with fewer responses, they're getting bad data, especially in that first month, leading to future revisions. Now, Trump has already named a new person, a conservative, not surprisingly, from the Heritage Foundation, an economist named E.J. Antoni, to lead BLS. He's been a vocal critic of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so this kind of par for the course with Trump, nominating people who are very critical of the agencies to go in there. Now, interestingly, Antoni did an interview with Fox Business recently where he suggested the possibility of suspending the monthly jobs report in response to concerns about the report's accuracy. Now, there are a lot of folks in the market who would not be happy about this. Even with the revisions, it is one of the most important pieces of data, crucial for investors to understand the health of the U.S. economy. But he's saying these numbers are all over the place. I mean, these revisions, last month's revisions, were massive for June and May in the hundreds of thousands. They were off by hundreds of thousands, I should say. But this will only fuel concerns that they're politicizing the data. They're taking the report off the market here. So I'd be surprised if they actually go ahead and do this, especially given the potential reaction on Wall Street here. They do have to figure out a way to increase responses and get a more accurate assessment of what's happening with the jobs market. But pulling the report completely amid the concerns about politicization and cooking the books the other way is going to be a huge thing to watch here.
Time for the speed read, starting with that federal takeover of D.C. police. From the Washington Post, about 850 officers and agents took part in a massive law enforcement surge across Washington, D.C. Monday night and made nearly 24 arrests during the first night of the operation, according to the White House. The show of force came after President Trump announced that he was sending the National Guard into the Capitol and putting city police under federal control. Even though crime has been trending downward in the last 2 years, and local officials released numbers showing that violent crime is at a 30-year low. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt telling reporters Tuesday that the arrests consisted of homicide, firearms offenses, possession with intent to distribute narcotics, fare evasion, lewd acts, and stalking. She says a total of 6 illegal handguns were also seized. Now, for context, there are about 30 to 50 arrests already on an average night. So we haven't gotten word if this is in addition to regular police actions that would normally happen in D.C.
Yeah, officially here, they've sent in reinforcements, federal law enforcement, federal agents, FBI, Park Police, a number of agencies are part of this. Now, Leavitt and the White House say this is only the beginning, that they will, quote, relentlessly pursue and arrest every violent criminal in the district who breaks the law, undermines public safety, endangers law-abiding Americans. This comes as they've also deployed National Guard to the city. Now, National Guard troops and the military will not be involved in direct law enforcement. In most cases, they won't be carrying firearms, and they'll be handling things like crowd management, perimeter control, communication support for law enforcement here, because there's a dividing line. We're not going to see Marines and members of the Army arresting people in the streets of D.C., but 100 to 200 soldiers are expected to be out on the streets at any given time. As far as the D.C. mayor, she says she had a productive meeting yesterday with the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi is now officially in charge of the D.C. police force in this unique situation that the president has rolled out here this week. The mayor of the city saying they talked about priorities with the Attorney General, and they're going to make deployment decisions because they run the Metropolitan Police Department now, but she is coordinating with them and cooperating because, frankly, Jill, she doesn't have much of a choice here. But this is a situation we'll continue to monitor.
A quick update from ABC News on the Texas state lawmakers who fled the state to prevent Republicans from redrawing district lines to boost Republican seats. It appears the Democrats are now planning to return home. The more than 50 Texas House Democrats say that they feel they've accomplished their mission of killing the first special session of the state legislature, raising awareness about the issue, and also sparking some national backlash about this mid-decade redistricting. Upon their return later this week, it appears Republican Governor Greg Abbott will call another new special session where Republicans will ultimately passed their plan to redraw Texas maps to potentially add 5 GOP seats. By leaving the state, the Democrats temporarily prevented the current special session from having enough present members to pass anything.
Yeah, so they have these special sessions in many states, folks. The state legislature sometimes doesn't even meet once a year. They meet every other year. In Texas, the governor can call these special sessions up to 30 days. Democrats pulled out of this session because they wanted to stop the redistricting from happening. As we've told you on this podcast repeatedly, it wasn't a matter of if, but when they would have to return home. That this was an exercise that they've engaged in 20 years ago, 10 years ago, various times, because Democrats, they don't have many tools in Texas because Republicans basically control everything. And so ultimately they drew all this attention. Jill spoke last week to one of them who was in hiding. And, you pushed him, Jill, on like, when are you going to go home?
Yeah, he wouldn't really give me a firm date. But when I said, what is really the goal here? Because we know you eventually have to go home and we know that you don't really have the votes. And he said it's publicity. It's getting the word out. It's trying to raise awareness of this issue. And
they certainly did that, right? They got a lot of attention to it. They've now gotten the attention of Democratic governors like Gavin Newsom in California, J.D. Pritzker in Illinois, several other governors who are like, maybe I'll redraw our maps to add Democratic seats if we're going to engage in this extreme gerrymandering in Texas. So that's ultimately probably what you're going to see here. So we'll watch the other states here as the Republicans will eventually get this done, but we thought we'd update you that what we thought would last a couple of weeks lasted a couple of weeks, and they will head back home in the coming days.
Okay, now to the Middle East. Hamas claims that hundreds of people have died of starvation in Gaza have been inflated. This is according to the Israeli government arm that handles aid and civil affairs in Gaza. The military body called Kogat asserted Tuesday that the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry's claim of around 200 deaths attributed to starvation included deaths that could have been related to pre-existing medical conditions and accused Hamas of using the images as propaganda. Kogat consulted Israeli security officials and medical experts and combed social media. Their findings did not specify exactly how many of the reported deaths involved pre-existing conditions, but highlighted the cases of 4-year-old Abdullah Hani Muhammad Abu Zarqa and 27-year-old Karam Khalid Mustafa Al-Jamal, who suffered from a genetic disease and from muscular dystrophy with partial paralysis, respectively. Zarqa had received treatment in East Jerusalem about 2 years ago before the war. Kogat said despite the allegedly high death toll in July, Hamas's health ministry did not release the identities of the deceased as it had done in the past, adding that an in-depth review of various platforms identified only a handful of actual cases. The group also said there is no widespread malnutrition in Gaza. The Israeli government has rejected claims of a hunger crisis or a lack of aid.
Though at the same time, the Israeli government has opened the floodgates to aid. The debate really has been between the UN, which says there's not enough, and the Israelis who say there is enough, but you're just not distributing it to effective areas, to which the UN then replies, because we can't get into all the areas because of the war. It goes back and forth here. It was interesting to get this report. There's also the case, Jill, of the boy who was photographed on the cover of the New York Times a couple weekends ago. Mohammed al-Mutawak, he also had a genetic disorder where you see the spinal cord, and he looked very, very malnourished, though the Times cropped out his brother, who looked much healthier, and so they eventually issued the New York Times this correction. There was another boy who was photographed who had a different genetic disorder, who the Israeli military had actually helped fly to Italy, and so they're saying that, a number of these individuals who were featured in photos had underlying issues. At the same time, a lack of food and medical services is not helping these kids and these conditions. Experts say that pre-existing conditions often make those people the first to die during early stages of a hunger crisis. And of course, the war and the challenges and distribution issues to various areas there in Gaza have led to issues securing food, water, medicine, etc. Now, at the same time as the Israelis complain here about Hamas images and the photographs being taken by freelancers who might have connections to Hamas or have certain agenda or crop out certain things. Well, it comes that the Israelis have blocked most Western media from Gaza for the better part of 2 years, which has made it very difficult to get independent accounts. So they're complaining about, who the Western media is depending on, but at the same time, not allowing Western media in there. But this report goes into a whole bunch of details, Jill, notably They didn't release the report. They released portions of the report, which leads to its own questions about everything the Israelis collected here. And so they are making a point of some of these examples. They're not able to explain all of them. And it does come against the backdrop of the UN and World Health Organization claims that about 12,000 children in Gaza are malnourished, a couple thousand of them severely. And so the back and forth continues here. But as we noted earlier this week, the Israelis say they are going to let in more Western media. So hopefully we'll be getting some more verified accounts in the coming weeks here, especially, to try to get a sense of this back and forth. As we talk about malnourished children, Jill, before we move on to the next story, a reminder that right now, the latest report from the UN out this month, 3.2 million children under the age of 5 are projected to suffer from acute malnutrition in Sudan right now. So as we talk about the various crises, we often, even on this podcast, along with most news outlets, are covering Ukraine extensively, Israel, Gaza extensively, Sudan. A reminder here, there's been a civil war raging there. There's massive risk of famine to, upwards of 12 to 14 million of those 3.2 million children under the age of 5, acute malnutrition. It's a story that does not get enough attention.
Moshe, I'm glad you mentioned it.
And of course, that's not to take away from the people suffering in other conflict zones, but we just want to make people aware of all the things happening in the world right now.
From NBC News, we're getting more details about that deadly shooting outside of a Target store in Texas on Monday. The shooting in Austin killed 3 people, including a 4-year-old girl and her grandfather. It started when a gunman randomly fired on an employee collecting shopping carts, and it set in motion this terrifying sequence of stolen cars and crashes that ended with the suspect arrested naked and holding a Bible. Austin police said that 32-year-old Ethan Ninecker killed the Target worker and then opened fire on the grandfather and his granddaughter before stealing their SUV. The violence sent store employees and shoppers running for cover. The police chief saying that Ninecker had a history of mental health problems, but she was unaware of any specific diagnosis. Court records also show he had a history of arrests for domestic violence and assault.
Yeah, and those of you familiar with gun violence know that one of the biggest predictors of eventual gun violence is domestic violence. That's why a number of states have tried to pass laws banning individuals who've committed domestic violence and been convicted of that from owning guns. And there's been some pushback in some other states about that. But just a really tragic story here, Jill, that unfolded. Ninecker crashing multiple cars, stealing a water truck, then stealing a woman's vehicle, assaulting her in the process. He also then tried to get inside a Waymo self-driving taxi, went to the home of an acquaintance, vandalized the home, and then was later spotted in a backyard without his clothes on, claiming he was Jesus as he held a Bible. This guy's had repeated run-ins with law enforcement. We mentioned the domestic violence, the assault charges here. Several of you asked on Instagram how this guy was able to obtain a gun. He apparently had a handgun through his family. Generally, people convicted, as I noted, of domestic violence cannot legally possess firearms under federal law. It's not clear here whether any family member will face charges due to this, the exact nature of how the handoff happened. But clearly his family had some issues with him, given his criminal track record here. As for the victims here, the Target employee, Hector Leopoldo Martinez Machuca, he was 24, was taken to the hospital where he died. Adam Chow was 65. He was the grandfather. His 4-year-old granddaughter also pronounced dead at the scene. Chow's wife, the grandmother, sustained minor injuries.
From the Financial Times, OpenAI and its co-founder Sam Altman in talks to invest in a brain implant startup that would compete with Elon Musk's Neuralink. The startup plans to connect human brains with computers, which is something that Musk is also working on. The latest place where the two rival billionaire entrepreneurs are competing. OpenAI's ChatGPT is already competing with Musk's xAI and Grok in the artificial intelligence space. The new venture that OpenAI is looking at is called Merge Labs. It is raising some new funds at an $850 million valuation. Altman has encouraged the investment and will help launch the project alongside Alex Blania, who runs World, which is an eyeball scanning digital ID project. Also backed by Altman. Altman will co-found the company, but he will not have any day-to-day role in this new project.
We got eyeball scanning digital IDs. We got brain implants. Jill, welcome to the 21st century here. Merge Labs is one of a slate of young companies looking to take advantage of the recent advances in AI to build a more useful brain-computer interface. So this technology, this idea of brain chips has been there for a while. It's decades old technology, but the leaps here in AI and in electronic components used to collect brain signals have offered the prospect that they could become more practically useful. Imagine implanting ChatGPT in your brain and having all that knowledge suddenly there. It's not exactly how they're promoting it, but I think, eventually.
I don't know. Do we want this? It hurts my head to even think about.
It does. It sounds painful. But these chips, by the way, are like so thin and small. Nonetheless, Neuralink is the Musk competitor. It's been around for nearly a decade now. It seeks to wire brains directly to computers. He's done a few experiments implanting Neuralink chips inside people to some mixed success. And so ultimately here, you now have Altman and Musk, who back in the day, were hunky-dory, working on OpenAI together. They had a falling out. They now hate each other. In particular, Musk really hates Altman, and you'll see it on social media sometimes. Now the two of them working on the same thing and competing on yet another frontier.
I think Altman really hates Musk. I mean, at least based on some of those Twitter feuds.
Looking at Elon Musk's polling lately, a lot of people really hate Elon Musk these days, from the White House to Silicon Valley. Jill, before we leave AI as a topic here, a story I found really interesting. Anthropic, that's actually an AI platform founded by some former OpenAI people. They're offering their Claude chatbot to U.S. lawmakers for a $1 fee. Now, you do see a bunch of AI companies trying to make their AI available to senators, members of Congress, top judges, as they try to help the federal government understand how AI works. OpenAI is doing this. Anthropic is doing this. Apparently, Google's doing this as well, though I should also note Google is a part owner of Anthropic. Interesting as, again, AI, they're doing their development out there, a lot of them on the West Coast, but they're very invested, literally and figuratively, in how Washington approaches this.
And finally, from Bloomberg, will wave pools turn surfing into the next golf? So they were once considered the antithesis of surf culture, but now even old guard surfers are calling them the future of the sport. The 2025 World Surf League Championship Tour kicked off in Hawaii, but the second stop was in Abu Dhabi, and surfers competed not in the ocean, but in a high-tech wave pool that produced consistent, customizable waves. They remove intimidating barriers to entry, whether it be sharks or strong currents, and also give quality control that makes it easier to practice. At the moment, there are 35 surf parks worldwide, but that number is set to skyrocket. More than 75 are currently in development. 9 are set to open this year. And one of the benefits is that they offer a controlled and accessible environment for surfers of all levels. The wave pool market projected to be worth about $3.8 billion by 2028. And these complexes aren't just wave pools. They have amenities like restaurants, spas, accommodations, and they cater to a wide range of users, from competitive athletes to families and executives.
So, Jill, I'm looking here for wave pool destinations. We got California, we got Waco, Texas, East Rutherford, New Jersey, Virginia Beach, Virginia, one coming to Houston, Tulsa, Oklahoma. So sort of scattered throughout the country here. There are a number of tech companies working with developers from California to Australia to work on these wave pools. So one of the more notable surf ranches is Slater Surf Ranch in Lemoore, California. That was built by Kelly Slater, who's sort of the Michael Jordan / LeBron James of surfing. He helped develop the first hydrofoil wave system. Jill, as I was Googling about this, it looks like Ivanka Trump, among others, has visited this ranch in recent years to test out this artificial wave pool and surf in these conditions. They have a 2,300-foot invite-only basin that can create several different wave profiles. You can catch 30 to 40 waves in a half day, where in the ocean, you only get 2 waves per hour. So very efficient in that way. They also have these surf resorts in Perth, Australia, Jacksonville, Florida, and you can get annual memberships like the version of ski passes to these wave pools. I don't know if I'm ready to say that this will be as omnipresent as golfing, Jill. This requires a lot more effort than golfing, less mulligans, a lot of eating it in the water. Whereas golfing, you're on dry land and you can kind of swing to your heart's desire. And if the ball goes in, off to the left or the right, you can drop a new one and hope nobody notices. That's what President Trump does, among others.
Really?
Jill, there was a video a couple of weeks ago that went viral of his caddy doing it.
Not cool.
They all did. Bill Clinton was known to do this too. We've had several presidents who apparently all engaged in this behavior.
I did think, though, this story was really fascinating because we have seen some of these more alternative sports getting increasingly popular. They're at the Olympics now. But the one thing about surfing is that it isn't so easy to surf unless you're really comfortable in the water and you go to a beach that has waves that are good for surfing. So it will be fascinating to see if 5 or 10 years from now, this is just going to be a normal thing where a family would go on vacation to a place like one of these resorts and surf instead of going skiing or doing something else.
Jill, I know what we're doing. We're getting the families together for the next vacation at a surf hotel / pool.
When you said there were 5 wave variants, there's a kiddie pool one, right? Because that's the one I need.
The starter waves. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why you go there is like the ocean doesn't give you starter waves. The ocean gives you what the ocean gives you.
Right.
Whereas like it's a much more controlled situation at these parks.
Yeah, you can't say to the ocean, can you guys turn it down? Mother Nature, can you turn those waves down a little?
All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1907. The first metered taxicab took to the streets of New York City. A guy named Harry Allen was upset that he was charged $5 for a journey of less than a mile. Back in 1907, $5 is the equivalent of $127 today. So he decided to start a taxicab service himself and charge a certain amount per mile, creating the first taxicab meter. He actually imported about 65 cars from France and created the New York Taxicab Company. Originally, the New York Taxicab was red and green, but he repainted them the color, what else? Yellow, to make them more visible from a distance. So the yellow taxicab, all because Harry Allen was super annoyed about how he was just being charged arbitrary amounts. And now, Joe, we're in the Uber Lyft age where sometimes those amounts can feel arbitrary. I mean, I know it's based on demand, but surge pricing and whatnot still taking place. The taxi cabs in New York City, at least, still, well, with all those attached fees, they're still running the meter for the most part. They'll always double check when you get into that taxi cab. On this day in 1918, the first woman enlisted in the U.S. Marines. Her name was Opah Mae Johnson. She was assigned desk duty at Marine Corps headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. On this day in 1942, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin drafted a memo to Winston Churchill and FDR saying, I need you guys to invade Western Europe immediately. It would actually be 2 more years till the summer of 44 before that would happen. The Soviets, of course, would fight from the east. It would take them a long time, and they would suffer tens of millions of deaths as they gradually made progress against the Nazis and would defeat them from the east as eventually the U.S. and the Allied powers would make landfall on D-Day in June of 44 and defeat the Nazis from their end by May of the following year. All right, turning 73 years old today. On this day in 1952, 4 years before Elvis Presley would make Hound Dog his longest-running #1 hit, the song was recorded the very first time by the voice you just heard. That is R&B singer Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton. She recorded in L.A. Several years later, Elvis would do his own version. It would get to #1. Now, because of how famous his version is, it's often mistaken to be his original. Nope. Hound Dog is Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton's song, and would actually be recorded by several other groups as well and altered over time. Jill, a theme of On This Day in History, the various versions of famous songs.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to find out the backstory of a song that you never knew had previous iterations.
And finally, a show that is still making headlines even this week, Jill, turning 28 years old today, South Park, premiering on this day, August 13th, 1997. Trey Parker, Matt Stone, creating that show in the 90s. I remember watching it in high school. It is still on the air. They've been doing a bunch of hits since they're part of the Paramount Network. They've been taking a lot of shots at Trump, especially as the parent company there, Paramount, made deals with the administration to get their merger through. But Trey Parker, Matt Stone don't care. They have a new contract. It is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're still doing what they've done for nearly 30 years over on the show.
Well, the best thing about animation is that the characters don't age. So technically, it could be on for another 28 years.
And another cartoon, Jill, that's still on the air after premiering in the 80s is The Simpsons, which turns 36 this December.
In unrelated age news, Moshe, there was a discussion over on the premium Slack channel. I think our conversation about cavities and when you got your first and only cavity confused some people. They thought you were 55.
Oh,
for whatever reason.
Was my math not clear enough?
I don't know. And I chimed in to be like, no, he's not 55. Not that there's anything wrong with being 55.
But I would look amazing for 55.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And review us kindly in the App Store.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you back here tomorrow.